Hey folks, Steve here with another NATO The Cold War Goes Hot War of Nerves video for you today. We are continuing the war turns. I'm expecting to try to cover turns 4, 5, and 6, maybe 7, just depending on how things are going. I suspect I may need to call this particular playthrough early and just say, hey, I think we all know where this is going. Um, but we're not all the way there yet, and I'm interested in at least playing through a few more turns to get to that point. Now, if you're just for some reason watching this video and you didn't watch the other one, I mean the Warsaw Pact is having a tough time now. This I don't think this is having to do with any flaw in the game. This is a result of our war of nerves sort of pre-scenario where the Warsaw Pact player was trying to be sneaky. The die rolls really did not go their way. The NATO alert levels increased. We tried to get some things done to give us some advantage, and we really kind of failed to do so. Um, and maybe some misplay on my part, in particular around the Fulda Gap, as the Warsaw Pact player, has led to some significant losses and reversals, though the Warsaw Pact player is on the advance in other sectors. It's already looking not so good, and this is coming down to, I think, a couple of factors just to cover it as briefly as I can before we move on. Not being able to be right up against the Iron Curtain border and being able to kind of selectively disrupt and destroy NATO units in detail at the beginning. There's some opportunity in some of the strategic surprise scenarios where you can kind of get into a better game position by knocking out some NATO units early and having them be weaker by the time the slugging match is really underway. Well, we failed to really do that because we couldn't start closer to the border. I couldn't get border assembly going in War of Nerve, so we were, both sides kind of, running towards the front, and the Warsaw Pact just not getting that surprise advantage. They didn't have the surprise mechanic as a benefit. They have been stuck fighting in the border terrain, which generally favors the defender, and have not been able to make a lot of great gains there. And then finally, the alert level of NATO was such that NATO's been rolling on a better air point table and interception table for all of their stuff. And generally, what that has meant is for every air point the Warsaw Pact is trying to use, usually the NATO player has been able to match it, or even do more airstrikes or air point usage than the Warsaw Pact player, which on the board has just led to more disruptions for the Warsaw Pact player than they would have wanted. And there have been some cases where the NATO airpoint strike dice have been awfully hot, and they've managed to do some step losses to the Soviets, which generally I'd say a step loss for the Warsaw Pact player, I think generally is kind of worse than a NATO player losing a step. And on the combat table die rolls, if both sides are losing a step, in many respects, I see that as a potential advantage for the NATO player because the Soviet units just get softened up enough that they can be eliminated on counterattack, and that just reduces their ability to make a lot of headway elsewhere across the board. So all a confluence of events leading to this result. We're seeing it relatively early in the scenario, which you can kind of look at as a strength or a weakness depending on your perspective. It's a strength because if the War of Nerves scenario has led things to be awfully imbalanced, you can fight it out and probably within a few turns kind of see the trajectory of things. I think the designer has even stated in certain places that the game is balanced on a knife edge, but once you fall off that edge, things progress very quickly. I think we're starting to see that here, so that is very much true. But if you were like, oh man, I'm going to call it, or we should call it early, maybe play to turn 7, just to be gentle persons, uh, and then re-rack and play a different scenario. I think that's very easy to do. So that could kind of be a good thing. Like, why drag out something? If you know the way that it's going and it's not going to change, you can get more value out of your time by setting up a new scenario rather than it being not totally certain and everyone's kind of guessing like should we have quit a few turns ago. I think it's like, yeah, we're unless some miracles start happening, I think things are looking not so great for the Soviets. So um, that's the preamble here. We're gonna play through. I'm gonna do the same thing I did last video and just sort of play each turn, show the aftermath, make some commentary, play the next turn. We'll probably do that for 4 turns. By the end of turn 7, we should have a pretty clear understanding of the game state and where the game's going to end up. I think it is possible, it's achievable, that the NATO forces could win an automatic victory by seizing a couple of Warsaw Pact cities in eastern Germany. Whether or not we actually see that occur, who knows? But that would be kind of the to me, that's what could be exciting to see is like, can we achieve that as NATO? I want to see if I can do it and why I'm not just calling it right now. So it's about what's the progression and story of the game as we move through. Um, right now, it's still pretty early for a lot of the mobilizations. The NATO forces are going to get some reinforcements. The Soviets are going to be getting more in some time, but not maybe immediately. So as both sides get reinforcements this turn trickling in, and they're on slightly different mobilization schedules because of the War of Nerves stuff, those new units coming in are going to be just supplementing what's already been lost, and may not be. It's like we've not seen a total collapse anywhere, but right now I think the losses that are occurring here are most significant that the Soviets may not be able to um, avoid disaster there. The West Germans and the Americans, with some help from some Belgians, are just strong enough to greatly threaten the game just in the Fulda Gap area. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and play through turn 4, and we'll come back. If something really crazy happens, we'll show it in between, but that's the way we're going to go. And then one last thing to mention, maybe towards turn 6 or 7, if it really looks like the game is going extremely poorly, I could see that being a situation where the Warsaw Pact player uses nuclear strikes. That might be something just to do it, just to try it out and see what that does for us. I mean, it's obviously not going to make the victory change, but maybe just to try out the mechanic, I may try to do that. So, all right, we'll do a cut here. You guys will see the end result of turn 4. All right, here we are at the end of turn 4. Just adjust the camera a little bit. You can see everything right now. Um, the end of the game is imminent here at the end of turn 4. So I have my eyes set on 2 East German cities that will achieve victory. That's Erfurt and Halle. We are not that far from being able to go for it, and really, the Soviet lines are collapsing in the central region through here. I mean, it is like one territorial basically between us and the cities, and that's going to be enough to achieve an automatic victory. Now, yeah, the Warsaw Pact player can be thinking about, what would it take to launch some nuclear strikes, and we could do that, but just from a gameplay perspective, like, is that going to shift victory? Um, Probably not. I don't think it's going to make much of a difference because for every nuke we use, it basically just puts us deeper in a hole around victory points or an Armageddon end of the game, in which case, really the Soviets lose anyway, or everybody loses maybe. But it's like, okay, well, I don't know that would seismically shift anything. We have denuded the Soviet manpower, at least operational units on the board, so badly that it is really hard to understand how we can stop it now. And a lot of this has just come down to leveraging the strengths of NATO more coherently. They have better reaction capability before combat to react into a hex. They can do, and it seems the Soviets cannot do this. They can do uh, uh, attack helicopter reaction. Um, and I'm trying to see. I don't. Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, Warsaw Pact can't do it unless it's on their turn. Put an attack helicopter in. So NATO has these little advantages, and they can cover ground better because, just as a for instance here, it's going to be hard to see. Up here in this city, I have some Soviet units stacked that can't do much. I mean, they can spread out. They might be able to actually. This is like the one area the Soviets could still do something is to punch through here and be trying to go towards Bremen and get in the backfield. That's kind of a last ditch hope to make a difference in the game, but it doesn't outweigh the complete just open gap from here to here right now of Soviet units. There's an East German territorial, and that's it. They're going to get crushed this next turn. Um, it's hard to imagine, any of this getting, there's no way to stop NATO at this point. Denmark is firmly safe at this juncture. We're actually pushing back some of the drawn out Soviet units. There are even units that are technically out of supply right now. So, or when the Soviets check supply, they're going to find their Baltic HQ is out. I think they're out of supply due to the ZOC of our German unit. Um, they're simultaneously putting each other out of supply, maybe is what's happening. But still, it's not good for the Soviets because they just now have trouble keeping things going. And by the time the Soviets can regain control of the situation or even get into Hamburg, again, it's going to be too late. We will have turned the tide in central Germany, and the NATO forces will win. Again, I feel like I'm really good at managing the NATO advantages, these extra reactionary capabilities. The fact that when we have air, and if we can match, air for air shot and have left over for some airstrikes on our turn as NATO, like, man, we can really clean up house. We've done a lot of step losses with air power that has then made the follow up attacks easier to execute. Um, so long as we can find Soviets in clear terrain, and that just is the best thing to do. And there's going to be some opportunities for punchback as the Soviets, but I find it hard to believe that we're going to see anything dramatically change. The Soviets have been trying to smash into Berlin. They managed to knock off a step the first time, all game in the 4 turns, they've knocked off a step. It will now become easier for them to knock out the remaining couple steps into Berlin. That will free up some units to maybe, you know, shift gears. Maybe I really need to shift gears now and pull these guys down, but it was kind of too late for that. So I don't know. I was thinking maybe we would be able to collapse Berlin quickly enough that I could then divert the Polish front to wherever they needed to be and be sort of the strategic reserve. Well, we're really, it's kind of too late for that. I mean, I can really line this up and say I've learned how to play the NATO forces well, how to make use of them well. The fact that, they might be single step units, but it just means you can stack units in a hex better. And if you need to expand out for defense and concentrate on attack, NATO's got flexibility there. The Soviets, if they start to lose units, really don't have that flexibility, and it's very easy to outflank a lone division or a division or two if you can force one of those divisions back. There's less steps. There's greater combat power, but there's fewer steps to manipulate. Um, and you can kind of make that work for you as the allies if you're careful and you're defending well. And overall, I think I'm doing much better at that as NATO. The Soviets have really not gotten to enjoy many benefits this game. Right now, there's still a lot of potency in the Czech front forces, but they kind of, they're going to smash into these guys who are hiding in defensive terrain. We're holding this city line. We just need to hold now. I mean, anywhere where we're not on the offense as NATO, we can safely try to hold, play for time. Even losing a unit, even having a gap in the north isn't going to spell the true doom of the game. The Belgians, or I'm sorry, the Dutch rather, are going to get to activate before too long, and they'll be able to kind of block in the northwest area of Germany for a little while, all to buy enough time for the Fulda Gap units to finish the job, so to speak. So maybe a lot of woulda, coulda, shouldas, but I think we're going to see going into turn 5. Um, we're going to see the end of the game in turn 5, or at least, if not the end in turn 5, it will be a foregone conclusion that turn 6 will see the end. But we'll keep playing through here. So let me tackle turn 5. We'll come back and show where else things have gotten to. All right, here we are at the end of turn 5. The NATO forces were one Warsaw Pact step away from victory. They took Erfurt and are now going to be pushing into southern East Germany and basically kind of have a pretty clean path to try to encroach upon either Leipzig or another city nearby. Though the Soviets had some reinforcements coming in by train that could, basically hole up in those cities and kind of hold a final defense line. The British are actually working on Magdeburg and only just holding with one East German territorial unit. The soft units being doubled on defense in cities kind of help them out here. Um, but really, the disruption's not helping the defenders. The key thing here is the Warsaw Pact did finally take Berlin, West Berlin, and can now send the Polish forces into play here as a stopgap to try to hold back the tide. The trouble, I mean, this is like again, like this is not where the Soviets want to be in this scenario. Fighting on the defensive, trying to stop a NATO victory. We could go to chemical weapons. We could go to nuclear strikes. That might help us, but over the course of the game, I mean, it's really hard to see where a victory can be achieved. We'd maybe be lucky if we could fire off some nukes, maybe destroy enough of the NATO forces that we could return to the attack. And maybe with such weakened forces on the board, the Soviets can kind of march through and cut a line of cities into West Germany. But it's really hard to see where we can consistently achieve that. I think the Polish front is pretty strong, so like that's going to be a difference maker. But we continue to see some of these additional reinforcements. The American reforger units are going to start to come into play and will lend some reinforcing capability to the front, though it may take a couple days to get them in shape once they arrive. It's really hard to see where victory can be achieved. So, again, almost NATO automatic victory. There could be just enough oomph left to stop them from taking the last city. Like the Soviets aren't going to retake Erfurt. That's just not in the cards. Can they prevent the fall of Magdeburg? Can they try to counterpunch somewhere? That's really what this next turn 6, is going to be all about. If the Soviets can't do that, it will be a NATO automatic victory. Their forces are in relatively good shape. I mean, we're even pushing back up here, which really puts this Warsaw Pact city up north in some danger. If the Allies can get, like, the Dutch are going to come in with their HQ, they're going to be able to kind of push through. It's really now just a matter of time. And the Polish front is not big enough and not wide enough to stop all of the vectors by which NATO is advancing right now. And the preponderance of air power here, and just the utilization of air power has helped the NATO cause quite a bit. I mean, the situation doesn't get any better for the Warsaw Pact. So we'll play through turn 6. I'm feeling like this is more of a completion exercise now at this point. Can the Soviets do anything else to stop the flow? I think I got a little tunnel visioned around Berlin for too long. That probably was a mistake. Not rushing stuff over here was maybe a mistake. Obviously, some poor play in the Fulda Gap. Over here, we're actually pretty strong, but we're bumping up against these major rivers. We're not making the gains we need to. We're not cracking this. There's now an Allied defensive line in good terrain all along here that can kind of just hold for the moment. There's no dire push for Prague needed. We just need to make it so that the Warsaw Czech forces have a hard time doing anything. And what we may end up having to do is simply pulling back and sending these guys up north as well. So just, how much can you change your axis of attack or defense? Like, it takes it's not nothing to try to take your forces and move them to a whole different part of the front. It's not hard to do that, but it's also not easy, and it's not gonna probably be enough to stop the consistent advance. And really, even if I said, okay, let's drag, forgot to take this guy off the board. Even if we try to go like, one, two, three, four, five, like I just don't have the units. Maybe with these guys, one, two, we shove them, shove these guys into this city, get these guys into that city, these guys into that city, pull these guys up. We could maybe keep the fight going. So we'll see. I'm willing to play it out, just because once I'm done, it's going to take some time to re-rack the game if I decide to do a strategic surprise scenario. I am thinking about doing that. It's going to take some time to get things kind of back to where they need to be. So I'm fine just playing the game and moving counters around and seeing what happens. Um, but NATO is coming away with this one. I think just really poor play is Warsaw. All right, guys, this is the end of the scenario. The NATO forces have won, um, and yeah, they gained control of Magdeburg, despite the Soviets were trying to do something, so they were putting down interdiction zones with their air points, maybe to slow down and protect this other band of Warsaw Pact cities. Um, but that wasn't enough to save from the British getting into Magdeburg, which that's the win. The end of the NATO turn, they were in control. So some thoughts here. I mean, I guess I'm not too terribly surprised at this result, right? We made it to turn six, being the literal turn where an automatic victory was triggered, so a little less than the maximum amount of time that it goes to. But to be clear, um, most games are not going to go to 14 turns potentially, or at least you're going to have a pretty good idea of where the game is going before that. So I don't know that this is like an atrociously crazy result. Like, I think this is the result of a number of factors. We've talked a lot about that over the video. The fact that I misplayed some of the Soviet operations early on. The war of nerves conditions were really not helping the Warsaw Pact's situation, and some early rough luck has kind of kept them from being able to make the gains that they really needed to make this a more competitive scenario. Um, I do think that I've adapted very quickly to understanding how to leverage the NATO forces' strengths and watch out for their weaknesses very well. I don't know if that's just a natural, like, I kind of got it, like, okay, this is how I'm going to operate here. And the only thing I could say I could have done better as NATO, like, I think I did everything very reasonably well as NATO in terms of decision making, how to approach the active defense and counterattacks, and when to push to knock the Warsaw player off balance. I did that very well. The thing I could have done better was not mixing up my units so much. So there's definitely an element of the HQ's supply and coordination where I think I did okay, but certainly by the end of turn six, I have done much better at kind of having a nationality of NATO forces like operating more coherently together. And you can kind of see this with the color of the units in these different sectors of the map. So, like, we had finally, for what French units are activated, and really still not every French unit has been activated yet, but for the ones that could be activated down here in the south, they're operating as this little cluster of blue units, right? They're going to back up the southern Germany front, and kind of help push the Czechs back, is kind of what they were destined to do. Just immediately north of them is a cluster of German units that are getting support from this German HQ. So you could call that kind of the southern German contingent. They're, West Germany 2 second corps, maybe is what we would call that. they're operating down here. They're going to do just fine, and they're operating, somewhat coherently there. We have the U.S. Contingents, which were kind of side by side now here at the end, where initially they were somewhat separated. They've kind of converged, heading up through that sector of the map, and all the Americans kind of cluster together, excepting a couple of oddball units up here in the north that were going to get support from their HQ that I kept forgetting to move when I could move it. Next to the Americans are some more Germans clustered in here, getting support from this HQ, the third West German Corps. We have these Belgians that are operating with their HQ. They're a little bit behind because they're sort of chasing. Some of those are newer units that have come in as reinforcements from reserves and are kind of clustering together to operate as a distinct fighting force. You have some intermix of British and Germans here. So this would be the West German First Corps and then the British. Um, there are a few random British units up north that are really just there on defense, and they've managed to stay in decent defensive order after the Germans got cracked pretty good. Now they were always in danger of having combat supply issues, but that really has not begun to manifest in real terms. So they were kind of fortunate that way. Even if they got pushed back, we now have that light blue. Those are the Dutch, and the Dutch have got their fighting contingent force that the frontline guys are really there for defense, and then behind is the HQ that's slowly kind of moving up. So if they had to defend and use some combat supply, they might find themselves in some trouble later. But now that situation's gotten a lot better for them. And then of course up in the Netherlands, we still have those special uh, Danish and German HQs that can support a mixed Danish German force, and now they're actually pushing up against the Soviets. And basically at the end of this, the Warsaw Pact is in control of one West German city left. We didn't quite manage to take it back. Everywhere else, I guess technically the Warsaw Pact is in NATO territory down here, but like we've seen a retraction of the Warsaw Pact, and the NATO forces are actively fighting in East Germany at this point. The Warsaw Pact did take West Berlin, so that's kind of a bummer, but like it doesn't really matter because the rest of these Soviet lines are under a lot of pressure right now. I mean, if we were to keep playing, and let's just say that automatic victory condition wasn't there, I mean, I think we'd see some tough pushback and fighting. But in general, the Soviets are so kind of fragmented and really just trying to throw units in to slow down NATO that we would see the rest of these Soviet forces probably attritted out over time. There's still more reinforcements that could come in, more reforger units that haven't come in, and the Soviets are just going to be out of gas. I mean, the more we play through, and the advantage is certainly in the NATO side. I mean, the Czech forces, I mean, if we want to talk about, we sort of talked about the state of the NATO forces, and generally, while most of the losses have been West Germans, there's still enough forces on the board where I don't think NATO is really in danger anywhere. I think they're firmly in a good spot to maintain offensive operations. That could start to slow down if we were to fight through the forests of northeast Germany there near Berlin, but um, I generally feel pretty good about where they're at. Like, we would pick apart the rest of the Soviet army over time, and would be willing to take some attritional losses to seal the deal there. Now, for the Soviets, or the Warsaw Pact, I should say, the Czech front is still in okay shape. Like, they've taken some losses, but they were generally pretty strong. The Czech units are strong. And so to see they didn't really get into southern West Germany the way they wanted to. This is kind of tough terrain throughout, and they never quite got on a good roll there, which is too bad. And really, it got to the point where they kind of had to pull back lest they get knocked out, and then the Allies can get into uh, Czechoslovakia proper, which would not be good. So really, they've now become more of a holding force, trying to get through some East Germans here, but just not finding the ability to get where they need to be. I mean, that's just the reality. The we'll call it the southeast German front has basically been destroyed. I mean, what units are left are minimal at best. The HQ is pulling back, so you could attribute a lot of this victory having to do with the southeast German front losing the Fulda Gap sector significantly, so much that that front is effectively neutralized. Like that front has been dismantled by the Americans and West Germans with some help from the Belgians in a slightly different part of the line. And you can't recover from a whole front basically being ripped to shreds. So that's pretty significant. The northeast German front has also taken some losses, and they've really, not performed as well as they could have. They had sent a number of forces into the Baltic front, and as we have seen over the course of the game, the Baltic front units just really didn't get to where they needed to be, where I wanted them to be. They did not get the successes on the amphibious and air trooper, paratrooper landings that I needed to have a real, honest threat to Denmark. So the Baltic front just couldn't execute those units from the northeast German front that were used to supplement them. Basically, their usefulness was stretched, and we didn't get a lot of punch in northern Germany like we would have wanted. So that front has largely been uh, ripped up pretty badly. The last fighting force on the board for the Warsaw Pact that has any potential to make a difference is the Polish front, and those units are fairly strong. It's a potent fighting force, but it's not enough to make up for the north and south fronts just being picked apart. They just, from a unit to unit basis, can't compete. So as a logical organization of units on the map, any particular front is reasonably strong. But the problem is they're more easily outflanked because all that firepower is concentrated in these big division level units, and the NATO brigades can afford, especially when they're mechanized or hard units, can afford to try to snake around the flanks. And if they can concentrate enough firepower to eliminate a division, that's going to turn into a hex that the Warsaw Pact can't cover, right? They can't. It's not as though they can break down units and spread out. At least I don't think they can. I got to check the force pull. I don't think they can do that. Um, and so just that brittleness contributes to the loss here. We talked about that a bit before. You have so much combat power. You can dish out. I mean, gosh, you can be packing in a given combat. If you've aligned things well, you could be chucking tens of combat powers, right? Like 20 a hex. If you get three, you could be having 60 combat factors, and you can get some spectacular results. But as soon as you take a step loss, a big 10 combat attack strength unit, some of those armor units that exist for the Warsaw Pact. Well, if they get a step loss, right, and the defender, if you're defending against that unit, I just want to show this, right? Here's a big beefy unit. Well, if you as the defender get to pick a step loss, well, you take a step loss on this guy, what does he turn into? Well, you lose 5 combat factors. The defense goes down a bit from 6 to 4, right? So better on attack than defense, ultimately speaking. And then that's still just one more step, right? So if you get lucky on a strike roll and they're in clear terrain and you get a 5 or a 6, you get that last step off, boom. Um, or this guy gets disrupted. Well, now he's defending at a 2, and the NATO forces can build up enough to get a reasonable die result. And even if they were to take, let's say, let's look at the combat chart table for a hot second. Let's say you get it down to 2, maybe you get a 3 or 4 to 1 as the NATO because you manage to get enough units into the combat. Well, these aren't the best odds, but if you can use maybe some HQs or helicopters to get up to 5 to 1, that's glorious. That's really the cutoff. 4 to 1, 5 to 1. That's when the NATO wants to attack all the time because they can more easily absorb getting an A1D1. A1D1s are maybe not fine, but you certainly would like them consistently. If you can do that consistently, that's great because you will eventually just remove those units. And if you can remove a few divisions, that means you're going to be more easily able to create flank attacks on the remaining Soviets. And from there, you can start to do well. Now, if the Warsaw Pact player units stick in terrain, that shifts the combat odds a bit. And you don't get as lucky on airstrikes disrupting Soviet units and that sort of thing. Well, then the Soviets are going to maintain some momentum. If the Soviets, I think, if we were looking at where on the chart do you want to be as the Soviets, you really would rather be at, maybe 5 to 1's the cutoff, really, where the Soviets want to be attacking at 6 to 1 or higher. You don't want to even, you want as small a chance of losing a single step as possible because you're brittle that way. You have a lot of strength, but you need to maintain that strength throughout. And I maybe have, failed to make that real. I didn't only now after playing through all these turns am I really seeing the picture in full effect across the whole map, not just in the Baltic approaches scenario, that if you want consistency and you need it, if you're going to push past the Iron Curtain boundary, past this initial ring of tough terrain, you really do need maximum results. You want 6 to 1, 7 to 1. You want to be dealing step losses. You don't want to take any step losses at all if you can help it. And then eventually that advantage becomes even easier because, yes, you will eventually burn through all these brigades, these NATO brigades that are on the map. Eventually they will, you will attrit them down enough that it gets easier to maintain. And because you're not getting a lot of reinforcements as NATO either, really, you do the opposite of what we had in this scenario, where once you got your opponent on their heels, it's going to be very difficult for them to come back and make a difference. So I think that's certainly an aspect of this that matters. Now let's talk quickly about my lack of chemical and nuclear strikes in this scenario. There's some reasons why I didn't, and I think I can articulate that well. You might be thinking, okay, well, Warsaw Warsaw Pact player, maybe with their back against the wall, should have been nuking the crap out of, say, the U.S. Seventh Group or something like that. Sure, I mean, we could have done that. Well, what would that have looked like? Well, let's start with nukes first of all. The way the nukes work is, yeah, they're very powerful. You hit a hex, you get to roll for each unit in the hex, and you could destroy them. You might, disrupt them. You may do all manner of things. And that would have been helpful to maybe knock out some of the stacks in the Fulda Gap region that were going to give us trouble, right? These were these strong stacks across different nations that were going to be a problem, and we could have slowed them down by hitting them with nukes. Well, here's the problem: if we really wanted a more, you know, there's no goodness for anybody here because if the Warsaw Pact player used a nuke, there's a 1 in 6 chance that they are going to lose the game for doing that. Okay, so already not great. If they don't end the game, if it's the other 5-6, that gives the NATO player a freebie, an up the ante shot, to fire one, back at the Warsaw Pact player, which, again, they could, pick a good target. I think the NATO player is more than willing to absorb a loss of a victory point, or to give the Warsaw Pact player a victory point, to knock out a city that they could then seize for automatic victory. So using a nuke gives license to the NATO player to use a nuke. And at this point in the game, even by probably turn 2 or 3, I think tactical nuke usage probably benefits the NATO player more than the Warsaw Pact player. And I don't think the NATO player would be the one to up the ante. So the way that works is if you use, if you know, first time somebody uses a nuke, you roll the die for possible Armageddon. The opposite player gets to use a nuke as well, but doesn't have to roll. So it like proportional response kind of thing. That's an option to do. If then the Warsaw Pact player says, "Well, I'm going to do another one." Now they've used two nukes. Well, now they're going to have to roll again. Um, and now it's a 1 in 3 chance of ending the game. And again, you're handing the NATO player a free option. Again, only, I mean, it might help the Warsaw Pact player for the moment, but they're just as susceptible to getting hit with something powerful and causing further losses of their already weakened forces. So it's like, you know, jumping out of the gate to try to use nukes to salvage your situation is not very good. Even in a situation where you're thinking maybe you can try to turn the game back around somehow and gain some advantage. It's just not. It's a tough thing to do. So if we had said, okay, well, to really reverse course in the game, I estimated that the Warsaw Pact player should probably have made at least one, two, or even three nuclear strikes. And I did some die rolls just to say, well, if I had done that, which one was going to be the one that ends the game? Well, it would have been the third one. So, you can't reverse time, but if we were like, okay, I'm gonna hit some stacks with the nuke. I'm gonna try to hit my own city maybe with the nuke, and try to take it back somehow, or do something to where NATO doesn't control it, something like that. Um, well, if I had done it any more than twice, that would have lost the game for them. This did not seem like a winning proposal. Now, I have heard cases of other, this is like on AAR session reports on Board Game Geek, that like NATO might use a nuke to take out Soviet units that have crossed the Rhine, so that NATO doesn't lose, via automatic victory for the Warsaw Pact player. But here it's just not as clean cut, because getting across the river, um, across the Rhine, might be very particular here. Here, you're just too much. That's like a border almost. That river kind of makes this very distinct end goal. Here, I mean, there's just too many options for NATO to focus effort and take a city or two, that any nuke this late in the game would not have made much of a difference. Now, chemical strikes are a little bit different. The problem is when the Warsaw Pact player, if they were deciding, okay, well, we're not going to go nuclear, but we're going to use chemical weapons to kind of slow things down. It's not that dissimilar of a problem, in that the chemical weapons, while we have built up a fair stock of them to use on the map, I think I've got like 16 chemical weapon strike markers. I mean, we could have laid down a lot of chemical weapon strikes and created a really bad zone of no man's land with all of that. But all that would have done is further sealed the defeat, because once you initiate that, the NATO player is going to get victory points for every turn after it's initiated. So if you're doing this even on turn 5, and you suppose there's going to be some number of turns left in the game, um, the cold, harsh reality is you're effectively giving up the number of victory points almost the size as this industrial region here in Western Germany. Like, it's that many points effectively. And that's making sure you don't use any chemical strikes on actual cities. You're just trying to use them on units. And if those hexes happen to be, if you get some markers on there that are going to hurt maneuver, you're really just going to be slowing down yourself on the attack. So it's like you could try to make use of this, but the amount of victory points that you're giving up to do it now is so high. You really have to go for broke and have completely turned around the game state by the late phases. And I guess there's like this thin possibility, maybe if all of those chemical strikes did very, very well, and we managed to, eliminate a lot of the NATO forces here by just carpeting it with chemical strikes, maybe there'd be enough Soviet units to try to make up for time and capture enough cities to make up for the victory point differential, which would be very difficult at this point in the game, or maybe to try to get on the other side of the Rhine. By then, there's still plenty of response units that we could peel off to keep that from happening. So even looking at it of like, do we take the lid off chemical warfare? It by this point in the game, it didn't seem like it was going to be worthwhile. And both of these options, both nuclear and chemical, feel like they are best used in the late phases of a campaign where you are doing reasonably well as the Soviets, meaning you're fighting in here, in this band out here, where the victory is going to be determined by that VP count, where you've made progress. It's not been a total disaster for NATO. You're fighting tooth and nail for every victory point because you want to get into that victory condition level of victory points, and each chemical strike is going to pay off dividends, or each tactical nuke strike is going to get what you need to make the difference for a victory. That feels the appropriate time to use these tools in your arsenal because they come with pretty significant costs. So for this campaign, with neither of those really being major factors for Warsaw Pact player, and the NATO forces basically being able to do what they want to do without using them, there wasn't a strong incentive to use either one of those. But I could certainly see a different game state where those would be very significant game changers, or really important factors on who's going to win the game, and that being a much bigger element of where you're going to make those strikes, and where they're going to count. So maybe there's an argument that much earlier on, when it looked like the Warsaw Pact initial offensive was not going well, maybe we should have taken the lid off and used chemical strikes that soon, that early. By the time we've waffled on that decision, it's kind of too late for those to really salvage the game state. We might have paid the victory point tax for starting chemical warfare early, and all the repercussions of using them across the map. But maybe that could have led to just enough of a difference of cracking the NATO line that would enable the Warsaw Pact to progress deep into West Germany and pick up either a lot more victory points or clear a path to get across the Rhine. And none of those things, we just didn't do it. And it didn't occur to me to try that because that felt like, that was a drastic choice, and I wasn't sure how the game was going to evolve. In retrospect, yeah, maybe we would have made that gamble if maybe we would have done it on turn 2 when there was recognition that things are not going anywhere near the way we really need them to be to have a chance at victory as the Warsaw Pact player. So that, I think that's the key thing here. So in retrospect for the whole playthrough here across these couple of videos, I think I can stack up all these plates and say, yeah, mistakes and luck. Bad mistakes, that's my fault. Luck, that's not my fault, but it hurts worse when you're already making mistakes and losing opportunities. The Warsaw Pact player is losing this, and losing this decisively to the NATO forces. I need to probably spend some time thinking through how to best use the Soviet units. I knew some things early on, like actually attacking the cities, the free cities of NATO countries, you're better off doing with mechanized forces because the straight up armor have strength penalties. So that's an obvious thing to watch out for. Sometimes this a situation of circumstance, you can't get all the units where you want them to do that, and you got to attack with armor anyway. But I do think I need to re-examine how to be effective as the Warsaw Pact player, because I'm sure they can be. I mean, all evidence and other game reports points to them being potent if you have the right circumstances and if you got the right momentum. So, yeah. So I think that's going to be it for this particular scenario, this campaign playthrough of the War of Nerves. I think this was a valuable playthrough to experience. I think the War of Nerves is a cool little feature, and it makes it so that you have a lot more variability in how the game can go. Because ultimately, I mean, you're using a pretty clear force pool. The reinforcements are very constrained. If you were always playing the same strategic surprise scenario, even accounting for the 1989 differences from 1983, you could maybe say it would start to get stale. But that War of, if you played this game a lot, but the War of Nerves provides that capability to just provide different permutations of how things start off, and that can lead to very drastically different outcomes. and showing the importance, I guess, of that strategic element of that security, defensive posture, and ability to respond. Early response and mobilization activities can have a huge effect on the front lines and how the forces meet and what are the results of the kinetic combat like that. So all good stuff here, guys. I think this is a good experience to play through and kind of see the way this all comes together. Given that the Warsaw Pact player has performed so poorly in this particular run through, and given that the War of Nerves scenario really didn't give them their ideal start, and that was still fun to play through, but that's kind of one version of events. I think I will try. It's going to take some finagling to get everything set up the way it needs to be set up again. But I think I am going to try a 1983 strategic surprise scenario just so we can see the inverse. I was thinking maybe I would just do this one playthrough and move on to another game, but it is tugging at my mind that we kind of see a one-sided affair here. I want to give the Warsaw Pact their best opportunity and play through that and see if it's any better. If we can pull off an opposite sort of upset victory of a Warsaw Pact victory and what that looks like in this game system. So, thank you for watching this video. When we return, or when I get my next video prepared and out, we will be looking at a 1983 surprise, uh, strategic surprise scenario, and we will play through that and see if we end up with a better result for the Warsaw Pact player. So, if you're interested, stay tuned for that. That will come here in time. I hope to be able to get that out over the next week or two. The holidays are coming up, which may constrain my time, but I think I can maybe knock it out. So, yeah, thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Take care and keep gaming.